Russia's aggressive activities in Eastern Europe, the Baltics, and the Nordic region have increased military activity in these areas. Russia not only jeopardizes the borders of Eastern Europe with the intention to invade Ukraine but also carries out risky activities in the Baltic region. While the activities of the Russian Navy in the Baltic and North Seas are constantly monitored, NATO strives to strictly protect the Baltic airspace. However, tensions remain high in the region, and NATO is on alert for possible breaches by Russian spy ships and aircraft. The alliance intercepts Russian military air or sea crafts almost daily. The Baltic states, Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania, are located in a critical corridor of air, land, and sea, and therefore, they are also affected by Russia's policies in these areas. Russia's playbook in this region pushes the boundaries. Vladimir Putin, the leader, attempts to undermine the NATO alliance. For this reason, Putin's air forces carry out risky and dangerous flights, especially in the airspace of these regions. There is a coordinated approach among allies to protect and maintain international freedom of maneuverability throughout this region, but Russia continues to cross the red line in the region. Recently, the Russians committed another breach in the Baltic Sea areas. The Royal Air Force reported that a Russian plane came close to Estonian airspace. Consequently, the Royal Air Force deployed British Typhoon jets from an airbase in Estonia. Heavily armed British Typhoon jets flew close enough to intercept their Russian counterparts, who were known to be in tension. Following the dogfight, the Royal Air Force reported that an aircraft from the 140th Expeditionary Wing stationed at NATO's Baltic air policing mission intercepted the Russian aircraft. UK Air Force officials announced that the intercepted aircraft was the Antonov 26 Kuril, a twin-engine turboprop transport aircraft used for both civil and military purposes. The Russian Antonov 26 aircraft can carry large military cargoes and utilize large military missiles. For Vladimir Putin and the Kremlin, this situation was considered a complete fiasco. The UK Air Force reported that the Typhoon jets were dispatched to the NATO mission from Amari Air Base in Harjuma following flight reports. British aircraft have been stationed in Estonia since April this year, when the RAF sent units to the Amari base as part of the planned NATO rotation. British Typhoon jets have been assisting in monitoring the country's airspace in light of the war in Ukraine, and the final round of patrols began on April 10th as part of Operation Ties, which began in March. Last week, the German Air Force conducted a similar operation in partnership with the RAF. Both Typhoon models intercepted a Russian air-to-air refueling plane flying close to Estonian airspace. The intercepted Russian aircraft was identified as an Il-78 Midas, which followed an inland route from St. Petersburg to Kaliningrad. The Typhoon jets were activated when they were unable to communicate with Estonian air traffic authorities. Speaking after the earlier incident, a British pilot of the bomber squadron stated that any aircraft not communicating with air traffic controllers would be subject to monitoring. Ajax also added that this is routine and works seamlessly with its German counterpart. This operation was not the first joint operation of German and UK fighter jets. In addition to intercepting the Russian Il-78 Midas fighter jet, German and British Eurofighters intercepted two Russian Sukhoi Su-27 fighter jets and an Ilyushin Il-20 fighter jet while flying over the Baltic Sea without transponder signals in international airspace. Any aircraft not communicating with air traffic control or not on a recognized flight plan is intercepted by flight safety protection law for all airspace users. Therefore, Russian fighter jets are strictly prohibited from flying in these areas. National security experts have warned in recent days that the Baltic region is an important strategic and economic area where Russia could try to undermine NATO. The United States, NATO, and their partners need to be prepared to act together against an increasingly hostile Russia, attempting to divert attention from its military shortcomings in Ukraine. In other words, tension in the Baltics is constantly increasing to prevent the passage of Russian jets. Not only the UK and Germany, but also the US forces are actively cooperating with these countries. Recently, the Royal Air Force Typhoon warplanes participated in a series of exercises in the Baltic skies of Estonia with the US Air Force's F-22 Raptors departing from Amari Air Base. The Typhoons engaged in the US Air Force's Agile Combat Employment exercise in the Baltics, performing basic fighter maneuvers with the fifth-generation F-22 Raptors deployed to Amari in support of NATO's Air Shield mission along Europe's east coast. The Raptors are based at Joint Base Langley, Eustis, Virginia, as part of the 94th Campaign Fighter Squadron. UK warplanes are currently deployed in Operation Ossotsi as part of NATO's Baltic air policing mission. The U.S. Air Force's 94th Expeditionary Fighter Squadron has deployed 12 Farad's 22 Raptors to Poland's Powiec Air Base to support NATO's integrated air and missile defense, as well as counter-integrated air defense system capabilities along the alliance's 1,500-mile east wing. The deployment of these highly maneuverable air superiority stealth fighters and their seamless integration with the Royal Air Force's 4th-generation Typhoon fighter aircraft demonstrate NATO's readiness to rapidly deploy joint forces against any potential enemy in the Baltic region. The Typhoons are part of the Royal Air Force's 140th Expeditionary Wing and are currently deployed in Operation Azovstal, where they carry out NATO's Baltic air policing mission. The presence of UK aircraft and personnel provides crucial assurance to allies and partners of the UK's unwavering support for security in the region and across the alliance. Throughout Operation Azovstal, the Royal Air Force personnel plan to continue participating in numerous air-to-air and air-to-ground exercises designed to test personnel and equipment in high-level combat scenarios. These exercises offer the Royal Air Force an opportunity to collaborate with NATO air and ground bases that are not regularly stationed in the UK. The Royal Air Force is conducting NATO's air policing mission in Estonia until August, when the 140 EAW will hand over their duties to the Spanish Air Force. Russia is deeply concerned about these military exercises of the NATO alliance and Typhoon warplanes. So, why are the Russians so afraid of British Eurofighter Typhoon jets and 22s? Advancements in technology have also impacted aircraft technology, especially the transition from propeller engines to jet engines after World War II, eventually breaking the sound barrier. One of the technologically advanced warplanes is the Eurofighter Typhoon. The Typhoon is a delta-wing, beyond line of sight, close combat aircraft with surface attack capability. The Typhoon's supercruising capability allows for high-speed sustained flight above Mach 1 without the use of afterburners. Under the agreement for the production of the aircraft, the UK ordered 232, Germany 180, Italy 121, and Spain 87 Eurofighters. Of these, 112 are Tranche 3 models, with the UK ordering 40, Germany 31, Spain 20, and Italy 21 Tranche 3 models. The total value of the orders is €9 billion. Typhoon jets can effectively host missiles such as AGM-84 Harpoon, AGM-88 Harm, AGM-Armiger, AIM-9 Sidewinder, and IRIS-T. On the other hand, Lockheed Martin's F-22 is a supersonic twin-engine, highly maneuverable stealth aircraft designed to quickly establish dominance, penetrate emerging threats, and achieve air superiority. While the F-22s were initially designed as air superiority fighters as part of the U.S. Air Force's Advanced Tactical Fighter program, these aircraft also possess ground attack, electronic warfare, and signal intelligence capabilities. In summary, the formidable warplanes belonging to the air forces of the NATO alliance that Russia's trying to contend with are not the type to allow Vladimir Putin's jets to pass in the Baltics or any other airspace. As long as there are powerful Air Force members like these two fighter jets in the NATO alliance, Russia has little to no chance of expanding its dominance through the occupation of Ukraine. Kiev conducts large offensive operations throughout the country. Mikhailo Podolyak, a senior advisor to the president of Ukraine, was the latest to directly confirm that Kiev's counteroffensive has already begun. After these statements, the battlefield in Ukraine flared up considerably. If we look at the eastern front lines of Ukraine, the fall of the Russian attacks in the city of Bakhmut and the increase of the offensive operations of the Ukrainian forces in the eastern front. Lines such as Marinka, Solder, Lyman, Berdyansk and Mariupol are among the most concrete proofs of this situation. Ukrainian forces first captured Klissarivka, 5 kilometers south of Bakhmut as the Russians became inactive in the city of Bakhmut. The Azov and Aidar battalion took over the position of the Russian Federation in the Shvika direction. Alongside Shvika, Ukraine's 108th Separate Mountain Assault Battalion managed to break through the Russian fronts in Marinka by about 3 kilometers. In addition, Russian military air bases in the cities of Berdyansk and Mariupol were targeted by Ukrainian forces with Storm, Shadow, and HIMARS attacks. Ukrainian military planners reported that they began targeting Kremlin-controlled howitzers, mortars, and rocket launchers in a systematic campaign to destroy Russian artillery formations along the war front across Ukraine. The Russians lost a record number of military equipment while the Ukrainian armed forces continued the phases of major offensive operations, not only on the eastern front lines, but also in the southern trenches. At the other end of the 1,500-kilometer front in the Kherson region, Ukrainian small boat raiders repeatedly crossed parts of the Dnipro River Delta, temporarily occupying villages and launching missile attacks on buildings used by Russian troops. Expected. More than 6 months after Ukraine liberated Kherson and the rest of the occupied territory west of the Dnipro River, Kiev's next major move is likely to be decisive for the future course of the war. In the best-case scenario, Ukrainian forces make a major strategic advance south, reaching the Sea of Azov and cutting off Russia's land bridge to occupied Crimea. Such an attack would not only devastate Russian logistics in southern Ukraine, but would also isolate the Crimean Peninsula itself and provide a way for Russia to be completely defeated in the war. On the other hand, if the Russian lines hold and the counterattack does not make a real breakthrough, such a scenario could mark the beginning of a deeper military stalemate in which neither side will be able to launch major new offensive operations. Less than a week before the start of major counterattack operations, Kiev is preparing for the 110th scale invasion of the Ukrainian Territorial Defense Forces. A modern crew of the 110th District Defense Brigade described the situation as stable from a village house a few kilometers from the front line. Denis, a 36-year-old crew member with the call code Jamal, claimed that the Ukrainian army was preparing for Crimea-focused southern offensive operations. According to Jamal, a 10-man Ukrainian military units armed with 60mm, 82mm, and 120mm mortar tubes are tasked with hitting Russian positions on the Kherson and southern front lines up to 10 kilometers away. And these units are supported by drones to help them aim. Distant explosions are evidence of artillery skirmishes that continued without attempts to attack. Also, according to the latest data from the Ministry of Defense of Ukraine, Ukrainian forces have completely captured Potemkin Islands in the Dnipro River, and this island could theoretically become a base for Ukrainian offensive attacks on Crimea through the assault bridges built across the river. Much of the island is wet, wooded, and poorly covered with roads. This is also an excellent front line for small groups of Ukrainian infantry. But Potemkin Island is a weak area for traditional Russian defense, which needs earthworks and dry ground to support tanks and artillery. So the Ukrainians seem much more advantageous in this front line. If we look at Russia, while preparations continue in Ukraine, Moscow is strengthening its frontal defense. So President Putin expects something from Ukraine. This is another harbinger of a major Ukrainian offensive. There are growing indications that the Russian military is planning its own heavy attacks or expecting major Ukrainian attacks. Official Ukrainian sources and military channels alike have recently reported that Russian troops and equipment are moving towards areas where, according to Moscow's estimation, a Ukrainian ground offensive is likely to be launched. According to daily situation forecasts from pro-Russian sources such as Rudolph and the Ukrainian Armed Forces, the most intense Russian troop movements are increasing in the eastern Kherson and Zaporizhia sectors on the way to a possible attack on the Ukrainian city of Melitopol. In addition, Anton Geraskinko, an official of the Ministry of Internal Affairs of Ukraine, who has published often unique and detailed military intelligence since the beginning of the war, reported that the Russian High Command is moving troops away from the northeastern and eastern Kharkiv and Donbass regions to build layered defenses. Geraskinko announced in a telegram post that columns of heavy Russian vehicles have withdrawn from their positions around the Donbass cities of Starobilsk, Luhansk, and Krasnodar and are heading towards the southern Zaporizhia and Kherson sectors. In other words, Russia is also very concerned about the severity and dominance of the Ukrainians' major offensive operations. On the other hand, clear timelines are set for the delivery of important heavy weapons to Ukraine. This is considered to be a primary factor for the continuation of the major offensive operation that Kiev has planned and is currently conducting. As a result, the Ukrainian army is trying to wage a freedom struggle against the Russian forces with Western military support to fulfill this systematic. Today, the commander of the Russian Volunteer Corps stated that they continue conducting a special operation on the Russian territory, successfully drawing even more Russian forces to the Belgorod region. Judging by the latest geolocated footage, the fighting in and around the Volchanka and Shebekino continues. The headquarters commander of the insurgent forces claimed that Russian forces no longer have full control over these towns. He said that the Belgrade People's Republic gradually becomes a gray zone. People have abandoned their houses. Regional administration and police are no longer functioning, while thieves and raiders are busy looting their neighbors. Interestingly, Shebekino, Volchanka and other settlements in the region together had approximately the same population as Bakhmut, and several reinforced companies had already managed to develop a significant presence. The commander of the Freedom of Russia Legion reported that irregular Russian forces such as police and border guards turned out to be completely incapable of protecting the border, which is why Russians are primarily resorting to shelling. Given that the insurgent forces are maintaining a presence in Russian settlements, Russian forces are wiping out their own towns and villages because they are unable to push insurgents behind the border and keep them out of Russian territory. The Institute for the Study of War assessed that the Russian Ministry of Defense continues to respond disproportionately to these raids to project confidence and competence. The ministry claimed that the relocated additional elements of the regular Russian army and conducted heavy air, artillery, and flamethrower strikes. The ministry also mentioned a deployment of a whole motorized rifle battalion. Local residents confirmed these claims and posted footage of various reinforcements entering the region. As we can see, Russian forces continue relocating thousands of troops and heavy equipment to the Belgorod region. And this is extremely good news for Ukrainians. Not only does it mean that Russian defense in Ukraine is becoming weaker, but it also means that logistical hubs are now full of military personnel and equipment that Ukrainians can destroy while they are still in transit. And this is exactly what Ukrainians are doing during these 3 days of special operations in the Belgorod region. Ukrainians conducted more than 100 precision strikes, specifically on the areas of forces concentrations. One of the biggest strikes happened today in Berdyansk. The footage shows the aftermath of the Russian air defense work and indicates that Ukrainians used up to 10 missiles. Some of the missiles were shut down and the remnants indicate that Ukrainians used Tokyo. Other footage confirms that some Ukrainian missiles managed to reach their targets. And while the Ukrainian General Staff is estimating Russian losses from today's strike, more information became available about yesterday's strike. Yesterday, Ukrainians struck Berdyansk with around 6 missiles. Russian sources reported that Ukrainians used Storm Shadow missiles. Satellite footage clearly shows the complete annihilation of 2 huge warehouses in the harbor, and also the significant destruction of the Azov cable factory. Several sections of the factory were completely demolished, although the northeastern part seems to be still usable. The day local residents also reported hearing at least 5 huge explosions near Melitopol. Later, it was reported that Ukrainians targeted Russian logistics and destroyed some facilities near the railway. Ukrainian official Petro Andryaschenko reported that Russian forces are replacing old and worn equipment in southern Ukraine, including T-72 and T-62 tanks and air defenses, which explains strikes on logistical routes. Ukrainians also conducted a series of humorous strikes on Russian logistics in the east because Russian trains are passing through this region. Russian sources claimed that Ukrainian forces targeted the eastern outskirts of Alkovsk with 4 HIMARS rockets. Russian sources also claimed that Ukrainian forces conducted a hammer strike on unspecified factories in Donetsk. Overall, the activity of the Ukrainian Air Force and precision artillery reaches all-time highs. And this is not surprising because Russians decided to make a great migration, which turned out to be a huge mistake. First of all, Wagner forces are leaving Bakhmut. DPR forces are being relocated from Marinka to Bakhmut to substitute Wagner, while armored forces are being deployed to Marinka to substitute DPR forces. Secondly, in anticipation of the counter-offensive operation, Russians are replacing old and worn tanks, armored fighting vehicles, and air defense in the Zaporizhia region. And thirdly, Russians are reinforcing the Belgorod region with motorized rifle elements. This means that the railways are working at full capacity and logistical hubs are full of targets. That is why Ukrainians are conducting hundreds of strikes along the whole contact line. Thanks you for watching us.